Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manty, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Lance Lambert, Chief Marketing Officer of Grove Bags. Thank you for joining me today, Lance.
Thanks for having me, David. Pleasure to be here.
All right, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. Lance, I was looking through your history, and you just have an incredible history when it comes to the cannabis industry. It seemed like you sort of got into it by accident. Is that how it happened?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had been in digital media and marketing for some years in mainstream, and a former senior vice president of mine at Scripps had gone to Digital First Media, which their flagship property is the Denver Post based out of Colorado. And this was right before adult use legalization was going to occur in 2014. So she invited me out, said, "Hey, I see a great hero path for you. There's a lot of things they need help with that you've done before." And just so happened, again, they're getting ready to launch a website called the Cannabis. It was a good friend of mine, still a good friend, Ricardo Baca, who now owns his own agency. At the time, he was working there as well and came up with this idea for the Cannabis. So yeah, it kind of happenstance into it. But my background, I actually grew up in Northern California at the gateway to the Emerald Triangle, and did have a relationship with the plant back in traditional days, legacy days, unregulated market, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, happened into it and then just ran from there, and it's been great.
And so you, after the stint at the Denver Post, you moved to Weedmaps, right? What was that transition like?
I did. That was interesting. So Weedmaps swooped me up. I'd been working with them already. We had a strategic partnership between the two media companies. And JJ, who was the head of business development at the time there, tapped me and invited me out to meet with him. And at the time, the CEO, which was Doug Francis, and the vice president, which is now the CEO, Chris Beals. It was really interesting. I have to tell you, David, I'd spent quite a bit of time in the .com SaaS space because of being in digital media. And here I walked into this office, beautiful building in the heart of the Irvine Spectrum Center down in Irvine, California, which is in Orange County. Very conservative county, conservative town. And then you walk into this beautiful Weedmaps building. And I was so taken aback because it really was, it had that energy of a .com, right? You had a bunch of, at the time, millennials running around on Razor scooters, Red Bull refrigerators, catered lunch every day. So it was very much that kind of Silicon Valley style. But it was catering to the cannabis space. But it was the big leagues. I mean, they were at the time, and I believe they still are the largest tech company in the sector. So it was a great experience.
Then you made the transition to sort of more the business side rather than the publishing side. Was it first Boveda?
It was, yeah. So I actually got swooped up by Boveda. I just left Weedmaps. They're shifting their media approach because of preparation for legalization in California at the adult use level. So Prop 64 was coming into play. And I wanted to get a little bit closer to the plant. I enjoyed being in media for several years, still love marketing, but I wanted to get closer to the plant. And that's where the opportunity came along with Boveda to jump in and be the head of their business unit, but then also took on a lot of the business development and marketing responsibilities as well.
So when you wanted to be closer to the plant, what sort of inspired you to get towards the equipment side when you moved over to Green Bros?
That's a great question. So, really, I knew I wanted to continue to stay in the ancillary space. I'm a big fan of the plant. Again, had a close, intimate relationship when I was younger. I grow at home. I'm very much a medical advocate and supporter, still to this day. Not an activist and advocate. So I say I'd lead with education, not with fist in air. But getting into the equipment space, I saw that being a necessity here, because in order for not just an individual or an entity, but in order for this industry to scale up, there needs to be some level of automation. And it's literally one of the only sectors, as far as at least domestic industries, that isn't fully utilizing automation. Something that you see in the production of corn, soybeans, broccoli, artichokes, asparagus, strawberries, et cetera. All these crops that we grow in beautiful California in San Joaquin Valley, they all utilize some level of automation, but it just has been a late adoption, if you will, in the cannabis and hemp space.
Is the late adoption because the tech isn't there yet? Or is it sort of a chicken and the egg problem where this is how we've always done business and, it's hard to change?
I think it's the latter. I think you're right. There's a lot of people, and I fully respect them. Again, where I grew up, I have nothing but the utmost respect for the traditionalists that are doing what they've done and what their generations past have done. Because believe it or not, I have some friends who are technically third generation growers now up on the hill, as we say, in the Emerald Triangle. So they do very much have that tradition of the takedown is manual, the drying process, the curing process, the packaging process, the trimming, everything is all done by hand, and that's how they've done it. But again, you're starting to see that as the plant becomes more commoditized, which we knew was inevitably going to occur and has already in several markets, that necessity for being more efficient. And unfortunately, human capital is expensive. It's the biggest investment of a company, the biggest asset oftentimes, but it is the biggest expense. So a lot of these operators, they didn't want to eliminate the employee base they had, but they wanted to level them up. So sorting buds is a good example. It's a monotonous job. Nobody loves it. At least trimming, you're bringing your own personal artisan and touch to the plant, and you're really getting hands-on with that flower. But sorting the bud, bucking the bud, those are things that are very kind of rudimentary, monotonous tasks that, to be quite honest, again, picking on California a bit, but when you have a state that has such high regulations, has such high legal, when it comes to workman's comp and issues like that, someone doing that repetitive motion time and time again, a lot of these companies, they shifted to automation just from a safety standpoint. But again, it wasn't eliminating the human capital. It was promoting them up into more QC, QA type roles where they're making sure that the quality remains through the process, but are able to focus on that throughput as opposed to the manual side of it.
When I was in college, I actually did work as a sorter at a manufacturing facility outside of the industry, but It was the worst job I ever had. It's the same part over and over. And I was sorting for one little thin membrane to make sure that was intact. And it was, you had to do thousands of pieces a day. And that was one where I just sat there. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And eventually, after I graduated, that role was replaced by machine vision. Is that something that sorting buds, is that something that could play a role in sorting buds? Is machine vision, stuff like that? Or, I understand that might be long down the line, but.
It's a little ways down the line, but the plausibility is very much there, right? So the technology, exactly to your point, rather it be, actually I was just touring a facility, Glasshouse Farms, which you probably heard of. Just so happens their new operation, it's the largest in the world actually as far as producing cannabis, is about 20 minutes from my home in Southern California. So I thought I'd go up and pay them a visit, check out the facility. The facility that they're now in is actually a manufacturer of both tomatoes and cannabis. So I was looking at the operation for tomatoes, exactly to your point. They have that technology in place where they're able to identify is this tomato yellow, green, or red, right? And so the technology is there, but it's marrying the two sides. But again, there is that slight challenge because we're just now getting to the point where people are like, okay, I do trust my flour in a sorting machine. I do trust my flour in a conveyor. I trust it in a trimmer. That next level will be bringing in a little bit more of the AI and just bringing, again, that level of automation to bring efficiency, which as the deck kind of comes out and unfolds, we're going to have a micro macro. And a lot of us in the industry, we hate to compare it to alcohol, but it is a similarity in the fact both have been through prohibition. It is going to go macro micro. Like there's going to be Coors and Budweisers. Yes, there's always going to be the large companies, but there's always going to be those small scale Stone Brewery and such that have that smaller scale operation that still have some sort of need for automation, maybe just not at the grandiose scale of the larger guys.
So this month in May, because this will probably go in June, but so in May, you started a new role at Grove Bags, and I'm unfamiliar with the company. Could you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so Grove Bags, a fantastic company. It's someone that I've been following for several years now, specifically Jack Grover, the CEO. Really interesting. They brought in technology. And of course, when most people think of technology, they think of robots, they think of mechanical, they think of automation. But technology, is at all levels. They brought a level of technology into bags that actually help with the curing, the storage, and long-term maintain of quality and consistency of the biomass, all the way to consumption. So we love to say, from post-cultivation to consumption, we maintain that quality of flower. But it's the technology in the membrane of these bags, which really is a game changer. I mean, that's what we get back to. So you're talking about sorting things, rather be a little membrane on a bottle, or it be, is this an A bud, a B bud, a C bud? That's one thing that really takes a lot of time out of a producer or processor's day, is drying the bud, curing the bud, packaging the bud. That curing is something that creates a delay in that process, right? So, the average, say 8, 10, 12 weeks for your grow process, you're going to dry for about a week. You're going to cure anywhere from 7 to 10, maybe as much as 14 days. It's an extra 2 weeks that requires manual labor. You don't just set it and forget it. You have to go in, and you probably heard about this. You have to burp the bags or burp the buckets. This technology allows you to not have to be hands-on with that bud. Literally, it creates that perfect atmospheric space for that flower to cure within that bag before it goes on to the next process, that is packaging or distribution, et cetera. So always get excited about technology. Maybe it's coming from the .com and in the SaaS days of my career, but whatever makes someone's life easier and sometimes identifies problems that people didn't even know they had. I'm always a fan of supporting that. It's been nothing but good times since starting here.
So the Grove Bags take out that burping step?
Correct. It does. And it's surprising because some people will use the bags and go, okay, well, can you install a little vent or something so I can burp it? It's like, no, that's the magic, is you literally do not need to burp it. It will adjust the atmospheric pressure, the atmospheric environment, so that you're not having to release that pressure and burp out, the chloroform or those off gases that you're always concerned about. That's something a bag does for you.
Do the bags help at all with shelf stability? Because I know that's been a challenge in the industry as well.
100%. And the one thing to factor as far as maintaining that shelf life and quality is preservation of the trichomes, right? Because the one thing that a lot of people don't realize is terpenes are highly volatile. They go to a gaseous state. Anyone that's consumed flower, when someone hands them a bag, or when you purchase a bag from a dispensary, you open it up, that bouquet that's coming out is the terpenes that are being released from the trichomes. So exactly to your point, that is another huge advantage of these bags. Is we have some clients that they'll be sitting on flower because of fluctuation in market. It's quite radical. While the median index for a price per wholesale pound is sitting right at about $1,250 right now. It's as low as $250 in California. It's as high as $2,000 on the West Coast or on the East Coast, which is very opposite of the West Coast. Some individuals that own these companies want to hold on to that flower until those prices rise. And that's another advantage of the bag, to your point, is that shelf stability, being able to maintain that quality and consistency, no matter if it's consumed today, tomorrow, or 6 months from when it was actually cured.
How big are these bags? How much product are they holding?
So as small as an eighth, so something that is very much for the consumer, for the end user, but something as large as a 27-liter bag that's technically a HDX Tote Liner. So if you ever see the black and yellow totes out in the right, all of us use them, or at least scaled growers use them. We actually have a bag that's a liner that goes into that you're able to seal it up, because no tote is actually airproof, right? Most containers aren't. So you're able to maintain, again, that environmental state, even if you're packaging it in a conventional manner using an HDX tote.
I wanted to follow up a little bit about how you say that you've had a close relationship with the plant since you were a kid. What was your relationship like when you first started, and then how has it evolved over the years?
Excellent question. So, like most, I was exposed to it in my adolescence, my high school years. I had an older brother and sister, so that probably played quite a role in some of the things that I experimented with early on. I always had an appreciation for it. At first, of course, it was recreational. Like most people, that's when it was introduced. But later on in my life, I actually had a bout with cancer. Now it'll be 20 years cancer-free as of 2023, which is awesome. I celebrate it like a birthday.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. And so after that, I really decided to take a shift. I respect Western medicine as a necessity. You get in a car accident, you need to go to a hospital. You need to get those sutures and need to get those bones set. But traditionally, especially from a proactive standpoint, I did start shifting my mentality more towards Eastern or holistic medicine. And again, a lot of influence growing up in the Bay Area. San Francisco is an epicenter. A lot of my friends being of Asian descent exposed me to a lot of those remedies that were all natural. And so my respect and my appreciation for the plant evolved as I evolved as an individual, as a human being, and just understanding and respecting it. And again, that's why I always put it as a medicinal solution first, whether it be for knee and ankle pains from years of running cross country and water skiing, or just for help with sleep. There's these attributes that I definitely find beneficial from the plant. And that's where my advocacy has come in. And I've been fortunate. The companies I've been with here at Grove Bags is definitely no exception to that rule. All of them have been understanding that I'm an advocate first. And I believe in the products that I represent. And as long as those products and that company that I'm representing supports the industry, supports the community and the movement, that's what I'm all about. So huge fan of the plant. I grow at home legally, of course, California, obviously we can grow. So it's not just an interest or a profession, but it's a passion of mine. And further educating, being on programs like yours, which do such a good job of entertaining, but also educating people, is a huge deal. That's something that's close to home for me.
Well, I mean, thank you for that. And one of the things that I'm drawn to in this industry is also, I mean, you talk about advocacy, and never before have I worked in an industry that seemed so collective for advocacy and just progressive movement.
Correct. Yeah, it really is something that, it might be a term that's thrown around quite a bit, but people talk about good vibes. And some people, okay, that's just, surfer, good vibes kind of, or that's this quote unquote stoner mentality. No, it's good vibes in this community and in this industry, because before this industry, like most, it was a community. And so we still want to continue that forward, but everyone's very supportive. Everyone's very proactive. I've been impressed, and to your point, David, just with the leaps and bounds of where we've come in technology. Again, it might be a little bit of a cliche term at this point, but nanotech, as far as getting into some of this quick release remedies like Wana brands and their edibles, where it can be an experiential, almost as if it were a smokable versus an edible high. The onset is 10 to 15 minutes. So it's more similar to onset, again, for alcohol, for someone who's looking at from a recreational perspective, versus a 45-minute to hour-long onset like your traditional edibles. So technology has come along, but I think it is, to your point, because of the energy and the passion that people have in the community that supports this industry, that's gotten us so far. Because keeping in mind, we're still federally illegal, although there's now 44 countries around the world that have legalized cannabis on some level, a majority being medicinal and a majority being in Europe. But South America, where they're at as far as legalization, where Africa is at as far as legalization, all those places started out with community before they brought legalization and subsequently the industry. But everyone supports everybody, and that's what I've always been a fan of. I would never leave this space. I've had people ask, would you go back to technology? Would you go way back to your automotive career? I love those. Those were passions of mine too, but nothing hits home like this. And nowhere had a community like this.
What did you do in automotive?
So funny, I'm third generation of an automotive family, so I grew up around it. Don't know much about sports that don't involve an engine. I started out my early years as a gas station attendant, just like my brother did, just like my dad did, my grandpa did. Then got into body, detailing, stereo, suspension, worked in parts department, service department, sales department, owned a rental agency, owned a transport company. I mean, literally, it was about 10 years of my life that I was focused on automotive at some level or another. And then digital media actually created that bridge for me to get into more of marketing and media, thanks to autotrader.com. Actually, Chip Perry, who started autotrader.com, took a chance on me because I didn't come from marketing. I came from automotive at the time. And then again, as we know, like we were talking about, media is what helped me transition into cannabis.
Well, I've talked to many people that started in a different industry and moved to cannabis, but it seems almost universally they want to stay. There's something about the industry that just holds them.
Very true. That's a now former colleague of mine, Emily, over at Grain Bros. Perfect example. She came from a large scale retail operation, Nordstrom's. And so she knew customer service. She knows management. She knows sales. She's been in this space for a handful of months. That's one of the things she said to me. She's like, Lance, all I know is I never want to leave. I love it here. And I think it's that level of camaraderie. And, as of late, I was at a networking event in Palm Springs during a trade show. And there were a few people like, not everyone's, like you hear some of these, there's some bad. I'm like, well, there's a few of those apples in every bunch, right? There's people that are in it just for the money. We saw that back in the earlier years, when the funny money was coming in from the East Coast, specifically those kind of Wolf of Wall Street type guys that were getting in on this. It's interesting because the community almost treats those individuals like splinters. We're not going to push them out right away, but eventually if they're about bad vibes, or if they're just about making money off of this community or out of the industry, that's strictly their core goal, is just getting rich. They usually don't last long, because they really aren't understanding it's a bigger movement. And this is all about a long-term goal, not a short-term gain. And that's, so for me, I've never been big. I have, several people like, you should continue to build your brand. You should do more with your podcast. You should do more with your writing. You should do more. And so, well, it's not about me. It's about me supporting the movement. I'm just an element in the overarching message. I love people that are all about creating their own brand. Ed Rosenthal, good friend of mine. He's created a phenomenal brand. I love what he does. But I've just wanted to make it more about, again, the people, the community, those that, bringing products like ours to, medical markets and to adult use markets makes an impact, makes a difference for the consumer and the user.
Well, and it's a relationship business. So in a relationship business, you really figure out who's in it and what their intentions are.
100%. Very well put.
As part of your advocacy, you do a lot of speaking engagements. What are some of the topics that you prefer to speak on at some of these industry events?
A great question. So I do typically talk about where I've come from, because that's what people are curious to know. Like you said, automotive, how did you make this transition? And so I do oftentimes talk about that. Another thing I spend a lot of time on, and actually write a monthly column for MG Magazine on, is the international movement, where on a global scale, how legalization is coming about. And it's interesting because some places it's more challenging than others. I was just talking to a few colleagues this morning, as an example, Cannabis, which is an event that happens in Prague over in the Czech Republic. It's at the fairgrounds, which if you've ever been to fairgrounds in a European country, they are phenomenal. They look like our convention centers. So this definitely top notch. I remember walking into this space the first day. I looked to my right and there was a pop-up daycare center. I was just taken aback, because being a criminal justice major in college, I know for a fact if that were to occur here in the States, the Child Protective Services would have been called probably within the first hour. Just some person that just isn't from the community, doesn't understand. So that is very evident. And I talk about those instances where it's very much accepted in some countries as opposed to the US or even Australia. Oftentimes some of these Commonwealth countries have the same ideologies as the Western civilizations do, as far as, it's a gateway drug, and, it causes laziness and memory loss and fatigue, and could be further from the truth. So I talk about that. And then also talk about how, to your point, you talk about other people that come from other sectors and other industries to get into this market and into this space. I tell them, we need everybody. Actually, we need more individuals in this category than most other industries, because we need doctors, scientists, but we also need people in sales, in marketing, in media, logistics, operations. Some of the people I've touched, I had an individual higher level in the military. He is getting ready for his honorable discharge. And he reached out to me and said, Lance, I've been following you for years. I've been in the closet about my support because of my employer and because of his access. To be quite honest, he even had security pass through Pentagon level. So this is a guy who had to be very respectful of where he was at his point in his life. And I told him, I said, hey, you know what? There's opportunity for you. And he's like, how's there opportunity for me? And I said, well, you're dealing with logistics. You're dealing with security and logistics in the field that you're in now. Mm-hmm. And this is something that obviously is a huge factor for a government, but it's also important in the private sector as well. He reached out and he actually posted up on LinkedIn. It's so touching because he kind of called out the few individuals that really encouraged him to follow his dream. And he's now running operations for one of the dispensaries in Florida. And he's 100% happy as he could ever be. It's everything he imagined. And he's able to bring skill sets that were taught to him by the US government. Mm-hmm. And so I tell people, no matter where you're coming from, there's something that you've done in your career that this community and this industry needs. So I often talk about that as well, because so many people have those private conversations with me via direct message or on the sidelines. no, open communication. If you're passionate about this plant and you want to get into this space, there's still plenty of opportunity, and there will be for years to come.
In your opinion, how are we doing culturally, particularly in the United States, overcoming reefer madness?
It's a great question. So it's one step at a time. I think we still are having a bit of a challenge. I know Dare has changed their vernacular, thank goodness. They've shifted it from, accusing cannabis of being a gateway drug, which I think was a huge step for them. We know, you and I are similar generations. Dare is nowhere near as relevant, nor is it funded as much as it was when we were kids. But I think backing out of that has helped us. I think also the fact that as much as people might have their opinions on CBD, I often reference CBD as a hero cannabinoid because it opened the eyes of the mainstream. Hey, you don't need to utilize or try to utilize cannabis as a solution in your health, only factoring that it has some sort of psychoactive attributes. There are body and mind attributes that come out of using this plant that are beyond, this getting high, as most people say. So I think we're getting closer. Some of the content, I also I criticize Hollywood, I have to say, because it's not just some of the entities that have been chastising or, going all the way back before Nixon, before Reagan, all the way back to Anslinger's days of really targeting minority groups, trying to alienate people from being able to vote because of cannabis use or cannabis record. But Hollywood also, they're the ones that created the stigma. Plenty of us joke around about Spicoli and him ordering a pizza on Fast Times at Ridgemont High because they painted that quintessential stoner. But they also painted that quintessential stoner in Pineapple Express and several other more recent movies. So I think Hollywood needs to get away from painting it as this certain type of persona for people that consume and just say, no, this is just an option.
Yeah.
I went to an event, a friend of mine started Keef Cola, Keef Drinks, and he debuted a new product in LA. And it was this beautiful property that was just off of Sunset. And it's where they had just recently filmed Entourage, the movie Entourage. So just a Spanish villa type mansion. And they had both infused and non-infused sample, appetizers, if you will. And then they also had infused and alcohol drinks because this was a private venue, so you could do that. And I was taken aback by the whole experience because I was standing there in conversation. I choose not to consume alcohol. It's just not, I think there's good reasons for using alcohol, more so for topical wounds in my case than for consumption. But I have friends that are still active drinkers and I respect the craft. But for 4 or 5 of us to be standing around that circle and a few of them drinking a beer and a few of us drinking an infused beverage and being able to have that social experience, that's what Hollywood should be showcasing. That is the new norm. That is where we're going, is that people might want to consume something that maybe will help them sleep versus tossing and turning, getting up and drinking water and using the bathroom all night.
Right.
That's where the future is going.
No, that would be a breath of fresh air, is to see, the more recreational user that's just, even someone with, fighting anxiety, just using it to stay even,
Yes. Microdosing, it's a thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. 100% believer in that. I wanted to get into your thoughts about federal legalization and starting with the banking side of things. Are you encouraged with some of the moves that we've made, a few forward, a few backwards in banking? And then, what are your thoughts on it going federal?
Yeah, I'm a little desensitized on the news. If you follow the LinkedIn feed, there's a lot of individuals, whether they be influencers or just thought leaders in the space that had their comments on the latest progression towards legalization on the Hill. We are a little desensitized just in that we've been there so many times, right? It's like you get so close to that line to where you're going to get to start the race to legalization, and then you kind of get stalled. I definitely support it. When I was a board member of ATACH, American Trade Association of Cannabis and Hemp, I went out there and lobbied for the MORE Act, for the STATES Act, Safe Banking Act. And, there were senators and Congress individuals that were willing to listen. Some of them are obviously big supporters, like Earl Blumenauer out of Oregon. He's been an advocate since I was born. But others are very much traditionalists and probably getting paid by the right people. The big three, as we say, right? Big Pharma, big alcohol, big tobacco.
Mhm.
But I feel like we are closer. And one prediction I made on stage, speaking of, I was actually seldom do I do this, but I was a moderator a few years back, about 2.5, 3 years ago now. And I asked the panel, I said, when do you think federal legalization is going to come into fruition, or at least make that big leap to where it's going to be imminent? And most of us were saying around between 2022 and 2024. I still stand by that. I still think there's going to be some sort of level. It might not be full federal legalization. It might just simply be decriminalization, which in itself is a huge step, or descheduling as a first step. But I do think we're moving in the right direction. You have overwhelming support. You're talking about, I think it's now 76%, the latest statistics I've seen, of the community at large in this country that are in support of cannabis. It might be a very conservative support, medicinal only, all the way to a full-fledged support of adult use and then some. But the point being is, it's an opportunity this country needs to take advantage of. And I just recently did an article talking about Malta, which, 500,000 population, little island just off the coast of Italy. Most people might think it's not so relevant in the grand scheme of things, but it is, just like Luxembourg is, and just like Germany is, because all three of those countries have said, hey, we are going to bring adult use legalization to our country. There's the support of the people, and now there's the support of the politicians. The politicians' position might be, hey, this is financial gain. It'll help fill the coffers with much needed taxes, especially post-COVID. That's fine if that's what it takes for them to legalize. I'm not against that. I know politics are a must. But every time another country legalizes or announces the movement towards legalization, even closer to home, Costa Rica and Mexico being perfect examples, that puts the US further behind. And it is a bit of a disappointment because, yes, we're further behind than most countries when it comes to education, but we're not when it comes to technology, when it comes to forward thinking. And I definitely categorize cannabis and legalization of cannabis as a forward thinking movement. And the US is just dragging its feet. And it's so unfortunate. And I think it does tie back to, again, some sort of political motivation coming from influence of the private sector of the big three,
No, I completely agree. Do you think the possibility of an impending recession would either bump it forward or push it back a couple of years?
I think it would move it forward. Again, we have to look at, don't get me wrong, I always reference, I'm a huge fan of metaphors and analogies. There's a reason why the rear view mirrors are small, because the future is in front of you at that windscreen.
That one's solid.
Having said that, right? You do look back and you look at prohibition, you look at the last time that this country was in a true depression, never mind the last recession. And alcohol was doing phenomenally well because a lot of people do turn to vices. Now, again, that's more of referencing it on an adult use and less on a medicinal. But when people utilize anything that's altering their state, that is obviously self-medicating. And that, again, could be pharmaceuticals, that could be alcohol, it could be cannabis. But I think if we do go into, and I agree, I think it's pretty inevitable that we're going to get ourselves into some sort of recession, not quite as drastic as we saw in late 2000s. But I do think that there is going to be an increase in use of cannabis, just seeing that it was deemed essential during COVID, which was a huge bump for the industry. I had friends in the industry, they said, hey, how many shows are you going to continue to do? Are you going to stay on the circuit? Look at how successful we've been the last few years without trade shows. So when the demand is there, do we really need things like that, outlets like that? So a lot of people have questioned where we're going just based on where we've been in recent years. But I think if anything, I think it would fast track it. And again, if the government was smart, they would say, hey, this is an opportunity for us financially, not just to appease the people, the majority they're in support of it, but actually to feed the coffers that we're definitely going to need filled if we go into a recession.
Talking about trade shows, you raise an interesting point, because I've heard a lot of the same, where we've had really good, 1 or 2 really good years during a pandemic with no trade shows. Where do you stand on either getting back out there or looking into new avenues?
Funny, I wrote a post, and normally I don't bring too much emotion into my LinkedIn post because it's LinkedIn. It's for business first, right? And I did decide before a trip over to the Netherlands to look into 3PLs in Rotterdam and then continue on to Barcelona to Spain for Cannabis, which is the largest, started out as a protestable, but now it really is a B2C and B2B show that occurs down in Spain. And I decided to post something up on LinkedIn about my apprehensions in traveling, a little bit of concerns about how it was going to be as far as success and ROI for my company I was representing, but just my apprehension on travel. And had a fellow writer from the Wall Street Journal reach out and ask for a quote on how things are opening back up and getting to the new norm. And we talked about that a little bit, the trade shows and events. I just actually wrote an article. It's going to be coming out, I think, in another month about it. I do feel there's still a place for trade shows, expos, and events, especially some of those protestivals that have been around for decades. Mardi Gras that happens in Nimbin, just 45 minutes from the Gold Coast in Australia. They're on, I believe now it's their 28th year that they've had that protestival. That needs to continue on at least through legalization, because that country hasn't. They have legalized medical, but they're still so far behind. So I think events like that need to continue on, but especially here domestically, the trade show scene, it's gotten so diluted because you do have a lot of organizers that are just putting it on to pocket. They're not putting on so much to support the industry, to support the community. And just like what we're seeing in Canada, right, where you have these large scale LPs and you have these micro licensed growers, the end user, the consumer, they're voting with their wallets up there. They're voting for the smaller guy because they know there's more quality, consistency, and efficiency in that product oftentimes than large scaled up operations. The same is occurring here in the B2B environment, where there's a lot of us marketers that are going, you know what? I don't think that this show really caters to my needs. I know you're doing it and putting it on because you think it's relevant and you think there's ROI for you as your business model. But for me, to further my company's success, my company's brand, and our support of the community, this show isn't it. So I think a lot of people are cutting back. I know some people are proactive that actually started cutting back in 2018, when a lot of the funny money was pulled out of, a lot of the investors were pulling out of the space. People are starting to pull back then. We're still going to be doing it. We're speaking, I believe we're going to be speaking in London at Cannabis Europa. I'm definitely going to be speaking at HamCan out in Germany before Mary Jane in July. Those are events where they're emerging markets, and there will always be a place for trade shows and events in emerging markets. Because again, full circle, it comes back to people that want to learn more about the plant. They want to learn more about potential profession opportunities for them to segue into. So those are ones that we'll continue to support. But it's going to change. The circuit is changing as far as trade shows goes.
What are your plans for your new role at Grove Bags?
I'm excited on every level. I love the IP. I love the technology this company has. I love the team. I've kind of gotten to a point in my career. It's interesting where, I don't so much go out and seek out the opportunities as much as they come to me. And so that's one thing I'm very humbled and fortunate to have. So when the opportunity comes about and the conversations start in, the interview is mutual. I'm interviewing that company, that owner, that individual, as much as they're interviewing me. And so the fact, again, that there's a phenomenal team, phenomenal product and branding that already exists here, I'm coming in to take it to the next level. So really get them to become more of that household name that they should be. And that involves a lot of the international again. So focusing on these markets that are growing exponentially, like the European market, the LATAM market. So everywhere from obviously the tip of South America up through Mexico, where we see exponential growth and legalization. So that's a lot of my focus, is not just the marketing at its core and building this brand and continuing to gain penetration and market share, but also to continue to build it from a business development standpoint as well.
Okay. What are some of the new markets in the U.S. That you find exciting, and where is Grove Bags the strongest in the U.S.?
So Grove Bags is really strong. Start off at the ladder, really strong in the Midwest. Like Oklahoma is a phenomenal market for us. Continue to get further penetrate into the mature markets, because the emerging markets are where the verdict's still out on what solutions exist that they want to work into their SOPs or into their operation. So definitely doing very well in the emerging markets. But the established markets, we're going to put a little more focus on. So that would include markets like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, as an example. Where I see the most potential, it's interesting because the Northeast has definitely been the focal point. When you see the Tri-Cities, you've got New Jersey, New York, but also not to forget about Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts. There's several countries that have come, states within this country that have come online in the last few years, or ones are getting ready to. So that's the fastest growing. But the Southeast is not too far away either. A lot of people think that the South is so far behind, but quite to the contrary. Kentucky swapped out their tobacco crops for hemp several years ago. The Carolinas have definitely progressed with hemp. You even have places, it's been a little bit of a battle politically, but Oklahoma, Tennessee, Alabama, and even Georgia that are having conversations around legalization, at least at a medical level in recent years. So I'd really say you're pretty much the mid-Atlantic / Eastern Seaboard is where the greatest potential for additional growth exists in the U.S. market currently.
Okay. You had mentioned that education is part of that equation. And you have a little bit of experience on the education side, particularly with cannabis. What are some of the initiatives that you're going to try to kind of spread the word?
Well, really helping people understand, and I reference it as the Cannabis 2.0 movement. Again, not to be mistaken, Canada talks about Cannabis 2.0, and that was when they allowed legalization of concentrates on the 1-year anniversary of legalization. So it was October of 2019 when they really got into it. But when I reference Cannabis 2.0 domestically, I'm more so talking about the evolution of the consumer in understanding the plant better. For some reason, and again, just looking back in history, I haven't been able to find this being an issue when alcohol came out of prohibition, where everyone continued to want bathtub gin and high strength vodka. People were so ready to get back to quality beers and wines and beyond spirits, right? That's one thing that for some reason hasn't occurred here. So mainstream legalization, yes, we legalized Prop 215 medical back in 1996 in California, but the modern movement towards adult use really came in the mid-teens, right? Colorado, again, then Washington, Oregon, et cetera. For some reason, there continues to be this push and emphasis on THC. It's all about THC. It's all about how loud and how fire that plant is. Mm-hmm. The best metaphor that I've used, and I apply it in every conversation I have, is talking about the cannabinoids alone is like only focusing on the engine. And while the engine is what makes it go, the steering wheel is what really drives the high. That's the terpenes. That's where the terpenes come into play. So another term that got played out a few years ago was the entourage effect. Well, the entourage is insinuating that there's something that's at the crux, that's at the core, and has a higher level of focus amongst all elements. It's not the entourage effect. It's the concert effect. It's everything playing in sync, everything playing in tune, from the brass to the pianos, to the drums, everything in that orchestra being in tune so that you get that ultimate outcome, that perfect sound. That's what needs to happen with people understanding that they should be looking just as much at the percentage of terpenes in their flower as they should be looking at the percentage of cannabinoids. And once we get to that, I think people understand that's where it matters on maintaining the quality and consistency of this flower, i.e. utilizing a product like Grove Bags to maintain that quality all the way from cure to consumption, all the way from post-harvest to that consumer that's opening up that bag and knows that the trichomes have been preserved, so the terpenes are still there and the cannabinoids are still there for them to have that true concert effect. So,
I had sort of alluded to your history working with green flower. This industry, like all others, is going through a labor shortage, and it's hard finding good people out there. Are we doing enough from an educational standpoint to essentially grow the next crop of employees in the industry?
Phenomenal question as well. So there are several entities, to your point, green flower being one of them, Oaksterdam being one of the longest running out there out of Oakland. Great team up there too. The education is there. It's interesting though, because I don't know if it's being held with as much relevance as it should. So I appreciate people that come into the industry, but I was actually another time that I was a moderator was on a panel about strategic partnerships at ICBC in Vancouver, up in Canada. And we were talking about working with agencies or working with entities, these partners that come in as consultants. And someone said, make sure you do your homework on the consultants. And I kind of jokingly said, but it's true. I said, you have some consultants in the space that you ask them about their experience, and they admit that they were a yoga instructor last year, but they've been smoking since they were a kid. And I kind of used it was later on in the afternoon, so I knew that the crowd needed a little bit of humor. I said, that's kind of like me calling myself a urologist because I've been using the restroom since I was a kid. Just because I know the basics doesn't make me an expert. That does not make me or give me a doctrine in my anatomy. And it's the same thing with these individuals that come in and deem themselves as industry experts, as cannabis experts. That's fine that you've been consuming. That doesn't mean that you know all aspects of the plant or of the industry. So that does come back to education. A thing that's going to promote education is for more of these entities and these, especially the MSOs and LPs, these larger scale operations that have anywhere from 500 to as many as 3,000 employees, making education a requisite of that employment, at least knowing the basics about cannabis, and not just knowing the facts, but also knowing the fantasy. It's the facts and the fiction kind of conversation, but making sure that they understand and not to spread any of those misnomers that have been passed down from generation to generation, again, about some of the side effects that don't really exist or some of the attributes that supposedly don't exist. So education is key, but I think we're a little behind. And I think we need to have more education, especially at a national level.
You mentioned some of the influencers and some of the voices of the industry that you like to follow. Who are some of the top follows out there that you would recommend some of the listeners and viewers?
My gosh, there's a lot of people doing it well. I would more so reference entities or groups, what the Beard Brothers have going on. They definitely have been rocking it, but so have the Gold Guys up in Northern California. Gosh, the Envuala crew, which is out of Santiago, Chile. They're the Espinosa brothers. And a lot of their content is in Spanish, but they are doing some English content as well now. And they're talking more about the evolution from an international standpoint. I'd love to follow a former colleague, employee of mine, Tom Angel, who has a Marijuana Moment. He does more of the political coverage, but definitely helps keep me in the know on what's going on from a legalization standpoint. Also have to give a nod to Intel 420, another group out of Canada, but they're a great aggregator of top and most relevant stories. And the last I would say, which again is more of an entity than an individual, is Prohibition Partners. They're one other group besides myself that I really see putting that focus and taking the time to learn and understand the topography on the global stage of legalization. And they have representation both here in the States and over in Europe. They're the ones that are putting on Cannabis Europa in London on July 19th and 20th, I believe it is. And they're another great group to follow because they've got all the facts on where legalization's at. Again, not just in the US or the Americas, but around the world.
You like to grow. Have you always had a green thumb, or has it taken some training?
No, I have. It's interesting. I've been accused of being a bit of a Renaissance man. It's just how I was brought up. And it's interesting. It's more so my dad, I have to admit, that taught me how to garden, taught me how to clean, taught me how to cook. I mean, I've had a little seasoning business as a hobby since 2005. So definitely love, cooking it up in the kitchen. So I've been a gardener since I was young. I remember Orchard Supply Hardware, Osh, would have a gardening show up where I grew up in Northern California, out in Pleasanton. And I remember going in and getting all the supplies and everything and coming back, growing my own pumpkins during Halloween when I was a kid. So I've always had a green thumb, just a huge respect for Mother Nature. I mean, we've been so abusive, and not to go on a tangent, but, we've been so abusive to the earth and so wasteful on many levels. Anything that I can grow. I mean, I make my own homemade salsa. I make all that in my garden. Yes, it takes more time and more effort than going down to Sprouts or Trader Joe's, but there's something about when it's homegrown. And it's the same with my flour. I've been very humbled with the people. I gift my flour. It's not about it for profit. I definitely cannot consume it all. Even just as much as I travel, I don't have the time, and I'm a microdoser anyway. But the feedback I've gotten from friends are like, you should compete. And I'm like, that's not it for me. It's not the accolades from the general public. It's getting back to the community and supporting my friends and my network that can benefit from what I grow. And I continue to do that. And actually this year has been fun. A good friend of mine, Peter Cerwini, he's with the Future Cannabis Project, does a great job also. He's a good guy to follow, FCP. He connected me with a geneticist out of Santa Cruz. I'm a huge landrace guy. So I love the true heritage, going back to the Northern Lights and Thai and you name it, just all those landrace cultivars. And he got me in touch with this geneticist, and that's what I'm growing this year is some landrace cultivars. And it's just awesome because that, again, brings it back to the community and really shows how tight knit everyone is. And I love doing that. And that's how my collection is. I've got Durban Poison, I've got Thai Stick, Acapulco Gold, Northern Lights. I mean, all this stuff that hasn't been crossbred. Nothing against hybrid cultivars. I just think that the plant in its core iteration of how it was meant to be from Mother Nature, that's what's cool to me, you know? So.
Lance, what can we expect from you or Grove Bags going forward?
Keep an eye out for us. We're only growing exponentially. Again, they brought me in at a phenomenal time. I'd love to say I was here from the beginning. Respectfully, I was not, but they brought me on at a great point in this company to where we really can take it to the next level, and fully believe that, again, based on what we have to offer and the way that we support the community. This isn't repurposed technology. This isn't something that we're bringing from another category. This is something that literally was designed specifically for this plant, and something that we really try to communicate and will continue to communicate to the community. So keep an eye out for us. And again, not just here, but around the world. We really want to be that household name as far as a solution for maintaining quality in flower, again, from takedown to consumption.
Well, you talk about putting a lot of good out there, and you're definitely doing a lot more than others to just be better, and it's inspiring.
I appreciate that. I really do, Jay. I just keep doing it. I don't very often stop to take count and see what I've been up to. But man, I love it. And again, applaud you for what you're doing. It's great to have the outlet and the exposure for us to continue to be advocates and to educate people. So thanks again for inviting me on. It's definitely been a pleasure.
Excellent. Pleasure's mine as well. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by giving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. Lance, thanks again for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Likewise, definitely a pleasure. Thank you again, David.
All right, for Lance Lambert, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.